Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2013 Early Learning Hub Technical Assistance webinar on Community Readiness, Asset Mapping for Early Learning Hubs. My name is Shane Sasnow, and I will be your webinar facilitator as well as co-presenter with Heidi McGowan today. We appreciate you spending your time with us, and we hope to provide you with some useful and actionable information. Today's presentation is on the topic of community readiness and asset mapping, presented by Heidi McGowan, an early learning consultant who's been working in Oregon now for 20 years on early childhood and policy development, and myself, Shane Sasnow, a strategy and innovation consultant who recently worked with the Early Learning Work Group. In addition, we have Megan Irwin, the Early Learning System Design Manager, here with us to assist. And we are pleased to be able to present to you, and we're very glad that you have joined us. Before we get going on our main presentation today, I want to do a quick poll. I'd love to see who's with us here. So I'm going to open this poll, and it'll have about a 5-minute limit before it shuts itself down. So while I go through the agenda and do just an introductory presentation, go ahead and fill out this poll. You should see it on your right side. If you don't see it, go ahead and hit me in the chat and let me know that you don't see it. So while that's happening, we're going to move forward on the slides. So you'll see our agenda for the day is webinar logistics, so we'll just talk about some of the details around the webinar first. Move into an overview of hubs, which will take about 6 minutes, and then we'll get into the community readiness presentation. After that, we will have some questions and answers, show you a couple of upcoming events, and finally give you contact information. Regarding the questions and answers, we're going to answer a few questions along the way, though mostly we'll probably do questions and answers towards the end. So with that, let's start with the webinar logistics. You'll note that your phone is muted. So please try to keep your phones muted because we're going to have a lot of people, over 100 people on the call today, and noise definitely makes it a little trickier to hear what's going on and it's a little distracting. So keep note of that. You'll also notice that on the right-hand side you have that chat box. It's available to you to send questions or comments to us at any time throughout the webinar. We will be monitoring that as we go. We'll answer questions when it is appropriate to answer them. And again, mostly we'll be moving towards the questions and answers at the end. Last, the scope of this webinar for today is to provide equitable technical assistance to all potential applicants on the topic. Questions related to the procurement process need to be submitted in writing to the Early Learning Division, and those will be answered in writing and posted online for everyone to see. We won't be discussing or answering questions related to the content of the RFA because it is a competitive process and it's bound by procurement rules. So in the first week of September, the Early Learning Division staff will be doing a series of in-person questions and answer sessions regionally. The dates and times for those sessions will be included in the RFA, so they are yet to come, and you'll have an opportunity to see them in the RFA. For today, our focus and discussion will be about community readiness and asset mapping and how you might use it as a strategy for your early learning hub. I'm going to go through a quick presentation now about the early learning hubs. For those of you who were on the webinar on Monday with Jeff Cohen, you will have heard this, and I invite those of you who have seen this a little bit before to try to identify something new that you have not previously seen. So now I'd like to do the overview of the hubs, starting with the vision. The reason we are all here today, our vision is communities working together to improve outcomes for children. Communities working together to improve outcomes for children. Some of the background for this is that 45,000 babies are born annually in Oregon. It's almost 300,000 children under the age of 6, nearly half of whom are born poor. 40% of these children arrive at kindergarten unprepared to begin their public education, and by 3rd grade, 41% of Oregon's 3rd graders are not reading at grade level. 32% of high school students don't make it to graduation, and this places Oregon in the bottom quartile nationally for receiving high school diplomas. In addition, Oregon has not had a coordinated statewide results-focused approach to early childhood education or school readiness, at least not yet. Over the last 2.5 years, a lot of work has been done on the early learning education system, and from this work has emerged a vision for a cohesive early learning system where communities will collaborate, They'll design their own strategies for delivering early childhood services and ultimately share collective responsibility for the same outcomes across the state. The Early Learning Council has specified 3 goals. These goals are, first, children ready for kindergarten when they arrive. Second, children raised in stable and attached families. And third, services that are integrated and aligned into one early learning system focused on results. So there's a lot of talk of early learning hubs, and the question that has been asked is, what is an early learning hub? We've been defining an early learning hub as a self-organized, community-based coordinating body created to provide a system approach to early childhood education that works to improve efficiency and outcomes for our youngest children. At a foundational level, early learning hubs will build on existing community resources and assets, ask tough questions about what can be done differently to get better results, especially for at-risk children. And it's important to note that communities have the option to define their own strategies and service areas to achieve the outcomes. This diagram shows basic information about the hubs. You can see that the child and family are in the center, surrounded by the community, and in turn surrounded by the hub. The hub is tasked with finding the children for universal screening, and then working with families to identify what they need and linking them with who will best address those needs, with finally the hub being accountable for the outcomes it achieves. This is a time of innovation and a new approach for early learning here in Oregon. So under the community-based leadership of early learning hubs, Oregon will bring public schools, early learning providers, healthcare, social services, and the private sector together locally around shared outcomes for the first time in Oregon's history. So Oregon is really innovating in early learning. You'll see that the poll is closed. Thank you for doing the poll. We appreciate that information. And I see that someone has videos on. If you have a video on, go ahead and turn that off, because you won't see us. We don't have a camera on this end. And if your phone is not muted, please go ahead and mute it. And with that, I would like to actually begin today's presentation. We have a quick question that I would like to answer. Each would need to dial in separately. It's okay if they just want to put us on speaker.
This is Megan. Lauren had a question. More than one person is attending at her site. That might be true for others. For you to all be added, you would need to dial in separately, so it's fine to just put us on speaker, and glad that you have more than one person attending at your site.
There you go. Great. Thank you, Megan. Megan will be helping with questions as we move through this as well. She's monitoring the chat box. So our presentation for the day, community readiness, asset mapping. I'm going to turn it over to Heidi. Heidi, good morning.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Shane. On Monday, we heard a great presentation from Jeff Cohen about collective impact, and he touched on several topics that will be covered in an upcoming webinar as well as at the summit held on August 12th here in Salem. Some of the upcoming topics that we're going to be talking about at that summit and on the next webinar will relate to further exploration of backbone organizations. We're going to talk about communication and conflict mediation, aligning and using data for coordinated outcomes and action, as well as systems of care across the 5 sectors. And as you can see, these topics really touch on some of the content that are outlined in the grid that Jeff shared with us in the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 columns. You can see the components for success outlined on the left-hand side relate to governance and infrastructure, strategic planning, community involvement, evaluation and improvement. And the content we're talking about really are in those first 2 phases, as we're in early stages of development as a state in our early learning hubs. So today we're going to touch on community readiness and asset mapping, which touch on the areas of strategic planning around mapping your landscape, using data to make your case and create a common agenda, as well as evaluation and improvement, utilizing data to identify key issues and gaps, and establish your action plan and shared metrics.
And I would actually add that community involvement is a part of asset mapping as well, because it provides you an opportunity to have rich and important conversations with your leadership team as well as your community.
Excellent. It really does. This process is a great community dialogue process. So another resource to note are a couple of tools to assess your level of community readiness. One is called the Community Readiness Assessment, and that's to assess your level of readiness as a community and as an emerging early learning hub. The second is the Service Provider Readiness Assessment Checklist, and that's designed to assess the readiness of potential service providers or existing service providers that you would like to contract with or work with through your early learning hub. You may have received this through an email that was recently sent out with a request for letter of interest, but you can also find these documents on the OregonEarlyLearning.com website.
And we'll be sure to put that website URL up at the end of the webinar today, so if you're trying to copy it down frantically, don't worry about it. We'll give it to you at the end, and we'll leave it up for a while so you can get it.
Great, thanks, Shane. So those are a couple of helpful tools, and today's focus is really on asset mapping, designed to be an exercise conducted with your hub's leadership team, or what Jeff referred to as a backbone organization. So our agenda today, what we're going to talk about is what is asset mapping, why do it, who should be involved. We're going to walk through an asset mapping process and identify key questions to guide you through the asset mapping process. That will lead to initial phases of action planning, and then we'll close with a review.
We would like for you to be interactive and involved today, so you can see how this process works, at least on your own, and get a little feel for answering the questions, specifically so that you can then take it to your leadership community and work with them and have these larger conversations. So as a part of the interaction, if you have some scratch paper and something to write with, that's a great place to start. So I'll give you a second to grab a couple pieces of scrap paper, something to write on, and something to write with, so that we can move forward and have you be engaged with us as we go.
All right, so let's talk about what is asset mapping. Essentially, asset mapping is the creation of an inventory of your assets in your community. They may be resources and strengths that are available to you in your community that might be leveraged to solve key problems, overcome challenges, but in the context of the early learning hubs, it's focused predominantly on achieving targeted outcomes and the early learning system goals, the early learning council goals that Shane referenced earlier. In the case of early learning hubs, asset mapping is focused on bringing together resources from those 5 sectors. Those 5 sectors being K through 12, health, social and human services, early learning and pre-kindergarten, and business. It's just essentially a framework. It's a framework for systematically identifying these assets that can be leveraged to achieve targeted outcomes. So why do we do it? For early learning hubs, it's an opportunity to examine what resources and strengths the community can bring to achieve the early learning goals. Those early learning goals of kindergarten readiness, stable attached families, and an integrated and aligned early learning system focused on results.
So when we think about why we do asset mapping, I like to think of it from the perspective of what is the value of asset mapping. And one of the key values, there's 2 values I think of. And the first one, the key value, is that most of the communities that we've talked to have actually done some needs assessments. Some of them are very thorough needs assessments, and there tends to be this process where everyone does needs assessment, and they see all these things that they have to take care of, all the challenges that are facing their community, and it can be a little overwhelming, and it can be a little bit on the negative side. There's all this stuff that's wrong. We got to fix it. When we look at asset mapping, it's the balance to that. The value is that we begin to see a bigger picture, and it's not just this negativity. It's also, hey, we've got all these resources. We've got these strengths within our community. We've got these things that as a unique community, we do well. And those are the things that we want to leverage, as well as whatever common assets we may have among the various communities. So it's the balance, the needs assessment. That's one value. The other value is, from a process perspective, it is really good for engaging the leadership team or communities, asking questions, and having some hard conversations. So just then we'll move forward. So
speaking of engaging people, who will be involved and what are their roles and responsibilities? And Shane, as you mentioned, the community is involved, children, parents, families, and stakeholders, residents and stakeholders. And in the Early Learning Hub leadership, we know that the 5 sectors, representatives from the 5 sectors are required to be part of the leadership group, representatives from K through 12, from health, social and human services, early childhood education, and business. And as you just referenced about needs assessments, representatives from these 5 sectors, in addition to parents and community stakeholders, will all bring significant data and information from their own needs assessments that they are conducting. So for example, home visiting programs, Head Start programs, and K-12 school districts all have unique data and information about the needs as well as assets in their community that they're going to bring to the dialogue and that you'll be able to build upon and map your community of assets.
So really quick, let's start the interactive process. This is a simple one. I've found that it's very helpful to have this list of sectors written down so that I can reference them. And we're going to reference them throughout the rest of this conversation. So if you take just a moment before we move the slide forward to write these down in, say, the upper corner of the first sheet of paper. K-12 education, health, social and human services, early childhood education, business. And you can add parents in there. Though parents aren't a sector, they are certainly a very important part of this work. So we'll do this just for a couple more seconds so you can write that down. We will be using these in reference to brainstorming for the various assets and ways to look at things. Okay, so think. Oh, sorry, looking at the wrong slide. There we go. Nobody said anything about the slide. So I'm going to leave this up just for a moment so that you can write these down. K-12 education, health, social and human services, early childhood education, and business. My apologies for missing that slide.
All right, so let's start walking through the asset mapping process. We're going to highlight some key questions that really are a framework for walking us through the asset mapping process. So let's first look at natural touch points. What are the natural touch points for children 0 to 6 in your community? Asset inventory. What community resources and assets exist that can or are contributing to positive outcomes for children? Needs analysis. What are the needs of children in your community? Asset needs relationship. Which assets might be used to meet which needs? Possible actions. What actions might you take using your assets to address these needs and improve outcomes for children? Action criteria. What are the criteria the actions must meet? And finally, the action plan. What actions will you take?
So for those of you who have done some asset mapping work before, you'll notice the basic framework here should be the same, or at least familiar to you. However, we took the basic or kind of traditional asset mapping approach and we refined it a little bit and focused it in on children. So that's why we start with the natural touch points, for example, because it is very much about where you will find the children. So as we move through each of these processes, keep in mind that we are aiming towards the Early Learning Council's goals, which of course are all about the children and outcomes for children.
So let's start with natural touch points. Where are the natural touch points for children 0 to 6 in your community? Essentially, these are the places that children naturally go. And what we'd like to do is explore these a little bit further. And I'm going to ask that you pull out that piece of paper that you wrote the 5 sectors on and brainstorm a list of all the locations where children are naturally showing up in those 5 sectors. So let's take a moment, let's take about 30 seconds, and we're going to ask that you send in one of the examples of a natural touch point through the chat box that will, to share with us the initial ideas that you're brainstorming. Let's take about 30 seconds.
All right, that was a quick 30 seconds. If you wanted to do more, you will have the opportunity to do more when you engage your leadership team. So I'm going to read you a few of these, just really quick to give you a broad scope of folks' answers. We got, well, first the question, where are the natural touch points for children 0 to 6 in your community? And you've said pediatricians, healthy beginnings screening program, playgrounds, Head Start, infant and toddler play groups, libraries, the Children's Museum, CCOs, WIC, all kinds of good places. K-12 education as a student. Hold on just one second, please. Good. Oh. Sorry, I just allowed somebody to annotate, and it did something crazy with my screen. Is your screen working? I'm going to stop that because it was messing up our end of that. Sorry for those of you who wanted to annotate. It got a little crazy on this end. So that was a list. One more, family, friends, and neighborhood care. So there's a lot of places where natural touch points exist. Thank you for participating. We're going to continue to have you participate. We like that very much. So we're going to move forward to the next step.
Great. We're going to do a similar process for asset inventory. And I just first want to call out, we're having you do this on your own, but this is truly designed for your leadership team to do together. And our hope today is walking through this process is a little bit of practice for you to do that with your leadership team. So in thinking about the asset inventory, what community resources and assets exist that can or are contributing to positive outcomes for children? Remember, assets can be individuals, organizations, public and private entities, all that are having a positive impact on children. And this activity is designed to think not only about what you currently have that's working well, but also what might work well, what assets might be leveraged. So again, utilize your 5 sectors that you've wrote down on your piece of paper, and go ahead and think about assets.
So just a couple of things. Part of the language, what Heidi was saying around might, you'll notice that in this question there's the word can, which may seem a little odd grammatically. It's put there very purposefully, because if you look at the assets that exist that are contributing, you already know what those are and you can just list those down. But we want you to think also about the assets that exist that perhaps are not currently contributing but have some potential. So that's why they might be of value, but you want to at least get them on the list so you can think about them and have a conversation. So some examples of other types of assets that are a little less specific, things like time or physical space, materials and equipment, for example, volunteer time, any number of things that you can come up with. So now we're going to give you another 30 seconds.
And again, we'd just like to remind you that we'll welcome you to share one of your assets that you are brainstorming with us.
So go ahead and take 30 seconds.
Great.
And that was another quick 30 seconds. People are throwing some good ones up here. We've got answers to this question include family, faith-based facilities and programs, free meal sites and food banks, faith community, parent education, mental health, the YMCA, mixed age income neighborhoods, Neighborhood Watch, city-funded community grants, Cradle to Career Initiative, library reading, summer lunch programs, and quite a number more, community health, mental health providers. So thank you for sharing those. You can see that there's a broad scope of possibilities that are assets.
Excellent. So it's important to note that there are also, while there are local community resources, there are also state assets that communities and early learning hubs can leverage. In preparation for our summit on August 12th, we have a couple pieces of information that we hope will be helpful for you. One of those is we'll develop a 2-page state asset inventory list, and it's not going to be a thorough, comprehensive, complete list. It will highlight key initiatives that the Early Learning Council is investing in or has prioritized. But these are initiatives that we anticipate will be leveraged by local early learning hubs, or could be potentially. And the other is a community data map. This is a very exciting emerging new process that we will be able to provide for you online, and we'll have an individual who helped create this at the summit on August 12th to share this with you a little bit more in depth. The community data maps will have key data points and key information for you to inform your early learning hub planning process and to share with your community stakeholders. It will be data that can be viewed from a community-wide level and drilled down all the way to even a school catchment area. It's a pretty exciting asset that we look forward to sharing with you on August 12th, and it will be available on the Early Learning Division website under Early Learning Hubs.
Yeah, and I'd just like to reiterate that both of these assets are going to be super valuable, and if you geek out on data like I do, The data maps are killer. They're really cool. So can't wait to share those with you.
Thank you, Shade.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay.
So let's move forward into needs analysis. And again, we're going to go through a similar process. And what we'd like for you to do now is to take a moment and brainstorm, what are the needs of children in your community? What's not working well? Where are we not achieving our early learning outcomes, our early learning goals that have been set forth before us? So let's take about 30 seconds. In the context of the early learning goals that we've talked about, what are the needs of children in your community?
Feel free to post some of those in the chat box.
Excellent. Thank you for sending those in. We have several. We'll see if we can highlight just a few here. So we have affordable and quality preschool and childcare. We have healthy foods, high-quality early learning programs, social and emotional support, affordable health care, adequate early education and intervention, housing, jobs, reaching children who are not in the system, for example, who are in the care of family, friends, or neighbors. Safe environments to grow, healthcare access. And I think we'll stop there. That's a very extensive list, and they continue to come in. Thank you for sending those.
Okay.
So let's move forward into the asset gaps.
So relationships, the relationship between the knowledge that you have and the knowledge that you're gaining. So this next piece is an exploration. It's a conversational exercise that helps explore the relationship between assets and needs. So at this point, you have this list of assets that you've generated. You have a list of needs that you've generated. In your community, you may already have some of these lists, or you will have the opportunity to generate them with your leadership team. With this process, when you begin to do this particular exercise with a group, be careful that you don't get too much into over-analyzing things and spend days and weeks and months in this, because you can end up in analysis paralysis. It's an area where you can go super deep and it can become a diminishing return. So this whole process is much more about the conversation, exploring the relationships, and looking for some specific things in the relationship. I'm going to give you 4 specific things to look for, but you may find some other ones. The items that I'm going to have you explore are overburdened assets, collaboration opportunities, asset gaps, and surplus assets, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So as you can see on the screen, I'll show you just really quick what this looks like at a theoretical level. So you see the needs on the left-hand side. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 needs. And on the right-hand side, you have assets, A, B, C, and D. First and simplest relationship is asset A takes care of need 1. This would be great. Say a funding source with no restrictions whatsoever is a great asset to have, and it would take care of need 1. And it would also take care of need 2, and it could take care of need 3, need 4, need 5, all the way out of infinitum. If you've got infinite money, you could take care of all the needs. However, assets are usually limited in some way. So what does that mean? It means that you're looking at the possibility of an overburdened asset. So you want to be careful when you have an asset that's super useful to meet a lot of needs, not to overburden it, or to at least be aware of the fact that it might be overburdened. Another relationship to look at and talk about is when you have multiple assets that might meet a singular need. Now, this is a good situation to be in, and it provides an opportunity for collaboration. If you have, for example, a work group that can meet a need, as well as, say, the library that can meet a need, if they talk to each other, they can reduce the burden on either one of those assets to meet that need, but they have to collaborate. They have to communicate with each other to figure out how to most effectively work. So far we've got overburdened assets and collaboration opportunities. Now, if you look at number 4, you'll see that number 4 does not have an asset that maps up. So that is where we are missing an asset. We have no resource to take care of what some particular need. So it is an asset gap. The asset gap actually becomes a need of the system itself. So it's not the child's need, it's not the community need, it's the need of the system to address children's needs. So it has to be taken care of before you can even begin to address children's needs. Last, you'll see that asset B is by itself, it's an asset that doesn't have a need. So is it a surplus? Can you repurpose it? Can you look at it another way that it might actually become valuable to the community and to meet some needs? So again, just the four particular relationships that I've been looking at are overburdened assets, collaboration opportunity, an asset gap, and surplus assets which you might repurpose. Now let's take a real, Heidi, do you have something you want to add to that?
This is just an excellent analysis of which assets are meeting which needs. Shane, can you walk us through some specific examples of specific assets and specific needs?
I'd be happy to. Now remember, this is a theoretical example, and nothing is ever going to be super clean. There's no one-on-one exact relationships. It's about the conversation. It's about the exploration of these relationships where the real value comes in this exercise. So when we look at the first one, you'll see that at the bottom, early identification and referral, that need can be met by the asset of health organizations conducting developmental screenings. So that's a nice one-to-one relationship. We might see the same relationship at the top with quality early learning, the asset quality child care and or Head Start can actually meet that. Now you may also find that quality child care and or Head Start also meets the needs of improving the rate of kindergarten readiness and earlier identification and referral. So all of a sudden, that asset has the potential to be overburdened. It may not. It's good to be aware that it might. So then, the last relationship, the relationship of the library reading program. Having a library reading program has the opportunity to meet the need of improving the rate of kindergarten readiness. So, since both quality child care and or Head Start and the library reading program may be able to meet that need of improving the rate of kindergarten readiness, if they have a conversation and collaborate, then they can reduce the burden on either one of them to meet that particular need. So you see here three different relationships: the one-on-one relationship, the potential overburdened asset at the quality child care and or Head Start level, and then an opportunity for collaboration between the library reading program and the quality child care to meet the need of improving the rate of kindergarten readiness. With that, I would like to move forward to, after this conversation, you've got a list of assets, you've got a list of needs, and you've now explored the relationship between the two and what those might look like, what they could look like. But we want to start bringing it down and putting some rubber to the road, so to speak. At this point, there's still some possibility, some openness to what we want to explore. We don't want to be super specific yet. We want to talk about all the possibilities. What actions might you take using your assets to address these needs and improve the outcomes for children? Now, you notice the word here, might. We place that word in this question very specifically. It's not can. It's not what actions can you take, because as soon as you say can, you're limiting the realm of possibility. And we still want to be open to exploration. We want to see relationships that we've never seen before. By using the word might, it opens up that possibility, knowing that as we move forward, we will decide on some criteria and we will select and prioritize actions. However, because we are innovating, because we are exploring new possibilities and trying to see new ways to do things, we still want to be open to the broadest scope possible. So at this point, I'd love to give you, say, another 30 seconds to answer this question. And here's a way to approach it. Think about it first as broadly as possible. Just write down whatever comes to mind. Then you can begin to break it down into how might I answer this question in relation to assets? How might I answer this question in relation to the needs? And you could also answer this question from the perspective of each of the sectors. What would this sector do? What would the health sector do? What would the business sector do? So on and so forth. So if you want more specific guidance, you can look at the sectors and think about how they might answer the question. Or you can look at the assets and needs and how those questions might be answered in that specific area. I'd like you to start just by answering them with an open brainstorm to see what comes up. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. Feel free to put some answers in the chat. We'd love to see what you come up with. Someone mentioned that perhaps we're going too fast, and we want to give you a little more time. Because this is rich stuff, and we want to give you lots to think about, especially around creative actions to take. So we're going to give you a little bit more time to come up with some good answers. We appreciate it. I appreciate whoever mentioned that you need a little more time, and want to remind you that for this particular exercise, we are going more rapidly than we ever would in an actual conversation with our leadership team. So this is just to give you the opportunity to see how this process works and to get a touch on a few answers. So apologies for going quick, and we're going to continue to move on. Here are some of the answers that came up to this.
Excellent. Boy, they're coming in. So some potential actions are shared professional development between early learning providers and K through 12, increase and improve family engagement strategies, engage in continuous action research related to translating early learning research and policy into practice, collaboration between kindergarten teachers and Head Start and preschool teachers, strengthening parenting programs and ways to engage families, grading funding opportunities, expanding family mental health services to include extended family. Businesses provide time for parenting education at lunch, community partnerships.
So really quick, I want to address the fact that we've gotten all these answers, and that we're not able to share them with you. However, we're going to see if we can figure out how to save this chat log, and if we can, then we'll be able to put it online, because obviously there's a lot of good answers here, which would be great to share with the whole community. So we will endeavor to do that. Hopefully we will be successful. And if we are, we'll let you know so that you can access those online. As we move forward, what happens now? Okay, so you're with your leadership community. Right now you're doing your own work, but when you're with your leadership group, you're answering these questions, you're generating lots of potential actions. And it could be a little bit overwhelming. You've got a lot of assets, you've got a lot of needs, now all of a sudden you have all these possibilities of action. It's time to actually begin to converge on where we're going to get our greatest value. So with that, we ask this question: what are the criteria that actions must meet? We have one criteria that we suggest, which is that the actions must meet the RFA requirements. So we would suggest that one. Beyond that, it becomes specifically community relevant. Everything is up to you and your community about what you would want to choose. We have some examples that we've observed from communities as they've been doing this work. So here's some examples that are actually coming from communities doing this work. The first is it has to move the dial quickly, also known as low-hanging fruit. Another is it must have long-term impact. Another is must address the target population defined by statute. So these are some criteria that others have actually come up with. As we are being interactive here, I want to give you another little bit of time, a little more than 30 seconds this time, for you to think about what criteria would you put forth to choose actions that you would actually want to move forward on and put some assets behind. So I'm going to give you a little tiny bit of time to think about what criteria would you choose. Okay, so we've got some good ones coming in here. The first is cost-effective.
Another is reduces disparities. Another is improves collaboration, enhances what exists and utilizes best practice without recreating the wheel, must meet all areas of service to provide greatest impact, provides consistent measurement across the sectors.
It has to be an action that provides services early in life. Actions are SMART, which is kind of your traditional strategic planning thinking. Is this is a little different. Sustainable, so specific, sustainable, measurable, action-oriented. You got resources for it, and it's time-bound. So there's a good list here. So we appreciate you sending those over, and again, we'll try to save those and send them out to you. With that, you've now selected your criteria. So this is your decision-making tool. As you move forward, we want to think about the strategic approach to developing your tactics and actions. The first thing you're going to do is, of course, eliminate some of the actions from all the big possibilities list that you've created by referencing the criteria. So you're going to say, what's our criteria? Which actions don't meet these criteria? And you just take those off the list. Now, what you may find when you're having this conversation is that you have some actions that you have energy for, and that you have passion for, and that you really think should be done, and they may not meet the criteria. So if that happens, this is a very good place to have a conversation. Ask, why is it not meeting the criteria? Ask, do we need to shift the criteria? Is it something that we're willing to go against our own criteria to do? Whatever the case may be, if you find actions that do not meet your criteria and yet somebody has some passion for it, it's worth a conversation to find out why there's so much passion there and move forward with either trying to manipulate the criteria as appropriate or just finding out why it's not appropriate and understand that there's passion behind it in the community. Next, you want to prioritize your actions, the ones that you've chosen, the ones that meet the criteria. The key here is I wouldn't number them. I wouldn't say this is number 1, this is number 2, all the way down to number 10 or 20. The reason for this is because everybody's going to have a different number 1 priority. And that's not so important about what's number 1. What's important is what's important, what's the most important, what's going to get you the greatest leverage in moving forward to achieve the big goals, the early learning council goals of kindergarten readiness, stable and aligned families, and a focused, results-oriented, aligned system. So you're going to think about those, and you can take the actions that you have chosen, and you can put them on a continuum. So from super most important to still important, but maybe not as high a leverage. That way you don't have to worry about what's first, what's second. You can just see it on a continuum of where you think you're going to get your greatest results and your best leverage. With that in mind, I want to actually have you do a little bit of work now. I'm going to guide you through some questions. So I want you to think about all of the actions that you just generated and look at the criteria that you've selected. Choose one, just one action. What is the action that actually has met the criteria that you feel is worth going forward with? So for yourself, just for now, for practice, choose one action. The first question you would ask your group is, okay, so what is the action? Now, you have a bunch of actions, and you're going to go through this next sequence of questions for every action, but you're going to do them one at a time. So right now, just take one action. What is the action? And then ask yourself, what need does it meet? If it's not meeting a need, then you'll have to have a conversation around why is it even on the list. It may have a reason for being on the list, but you should at least understand why if it's not meeting a need. And then, what asset does it use? How are you actually going to move forward in achieving that action? And again, if there's no asset, then you've identified an asset gap, and you've identified an action that's really important. So you want to do this action, but maybe you don't have the resources to meet it. Good conversation to have. Then we want to answer the question, who is responsible for it? You will find that oftentimes it will be a group that you think is responsible for it, and that's fine. However, I want you to identify, and your leadership team should identify, even within a group, a very specific person who will be responsible for it. Now, this doesn't mean that they'll do all the work. It simply means that you've got one person who always has their eye on the ball. They are always going to be watching that particular action to make sure that something is happening, that things are moving forward, that people are aware of it. So assign a single person to have their eye on that particular ball. They're the one who are responsible for it. Who are they accountable to? They may be accountable to the leadership team or to their own work group or to the whole community. So you have to decide who they are accountable to so that they can report out on progress and what's happening. specifically at some point, so that you know that you're making progress, and accountability always has a due date to it. So, what is the due date? So when we look back and we say, okay, answer these questions. What is the action? What need does it meet? What asset does it use? Who's responsible for it? Who's putting their eye on the ball, keeping their eye on the ball? Who are they accountable to? Who is the project accountable to? And what is the due date? So we've gone all the way from starting with an asset list, a needs assessment list or needs analysis list, and a list of touch points for where children are in the community. We've talked about the relationship between them and moved from those just lists and more theoretical pieces of information to what are we going to do? What is the action that we want to take? So we're now hitting the rubber to the road, and you go through each of those actions, you answer these questions, and then you go out and start doing some work. So today we've discussed the following things. Heidi is going to go over this with you, just as a review of what we've covered.
Excellent. Thank you, Shane. I just want to go back to the beginning of our discussion. We started with, we reflected back on some of Jeff Cohen's collective impact pieces of information and how some of the content we're discussing connects to it. But then we also went into how early phases of community assessment can be done and have offered the tools, the community assessment readiness tools, into asset mapping, which are lead then to action planning and action next steps. I do just want to call out, this is a process we're talking through today, and that when we've asked for your feedback, we aren't here today to do a thorough assessment or to even talk about what those assets are or should be, or what the needs are or should be, or what the criteria is or should be, or what the action is or should be. That's really for you to develop with your Early Learning Hub, leaning on some of the requirements in the RFA. What we presented to you today to you is really a process, and that process will incorporate many other pieces of assets, data, and resource to help you identify your action plan. So today what we discussed is we talked about what asset mapping is, and then we talked a little about why do you do it, and who should be involved. And then we outlined some asset mapping steps that start with identifying natural touch points of children, that identify assets contributing to positive outcomes, identify the needs of children in your community, and then explore the relationship between those needs and assets, and then identified actions to improve outcomes, and then established criteria to select and prioritize actions that will inform and outline your action plan. And again, this is a process. We weren't here to, our brainstorm and your really great interactive feedback was just to help get us thinking, and we encourage you to use this process as you go back to your leadership team and walk through this process with your leadership team in your Emerging Learning Hub.
So really quick, we've got a question, will these slides be available on the website? So actually we are moving into the question answer period now, and I'd like to answer that question first. So this entire recording, along with every other webinar, will be available on the website, and we will give you the URL here shortly at the end of this. So yes, in addition to that, there will be a number of other assets that are available online, one of them being in the same space, one of them being the state list of assets, one of them being access to the cool data maps, and we also have put together a workbook that you can go through and use to understand the process that we've worked with today more thoroughly. You can actually just take it and do it on your own and work through the workbook with your leadership team. So you won't have to go back through and look at this if that's what you're looking for as the process. It is actually in a workbook which will be available to you.
And Shane, I'd like to add in that workbook are actually templates with these questions in there. So you can actually use the templates either individually or as a team in your leadership, but it will be a guide to help walk you through this process.
Okay, so at this point, I think we're open for questions and answers. If you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in there and we'll see if we can answer them.
Hi, this is Megan. We just got a question from Patrick asking when the asset data map will be available. It will be available on August 12th at the Early Learning Hub Summit, and then following that. Sorry for the silence. We're just navigating the questions. We had another question come in asking about the role of demographics and service data in the process of asset mapping. And we just want to highlight that the role of demographics is extremely important. Step one is really to understand where the children are that you want to serve and define what children and family you want to serve demographically, so that all of your criteria and strategies can point toward what is going to be highest leverage and make the biggest difference for the children and families that you desire to serve.
Also, just to make a quick point, the data maps that are going to be available to you have a lot of information around demographics and I believe service areas that you can access, correct?
We have another question that's just come in asking if the RFA will provide more guidance regarding goals and outcome measures besides the 3 overarching goals. Without getting into any detailed content related to the RFA, which I'm not allowed to do, all I can say is yes, it will provide more guidance, so you can look forward to that, but we can't say anything else about content that is actually in the RFA.
There's a question about how does this asset mapping fit into the community readiness assessment document referenced at the beginning of this webinar. In the workbook that we put together, at the very end of it, you'll actually see that there are a few overlapping questions that I pulled out of that document, the community readiness assessment document. Otherwise, it's a whole other set of questions that it will help you work with the leadership team to better understand even a broader scope of how ready your community is to move forward with this work. So there is a little bit of overlap, but it's not, there's a lot of stuff in that document that is not touched on in the asset mapping process.
A couple questions have come in asking for clarification about the level of funding being considered for each hub and for the number of hubs to be approved. Released in the RFA will be the funding allocation formula. What I can say right now is that you can look back and see the amount of money that the legislature appropriated for the launch of hubs and use that as a guide for your thoughts. There was also a question about speaking further about the 2 readiness assessments and how they differ from one another. So just to make that point super clear, the content in each of those readiness assessments is somewhat similar. One, though, is targeted to assessing readiness and assets for an entire community coming together around a hub. That's the community self-readiness assessment. And then there's another one, provider self-readiness assessment. Some similar content, some similar questions. That's really meant to be used from a hub leadership team to providers of services for young children and families to have a conversation with providers that you're thinking about coordinating. To understand how ready they are to fold into the strategies that you might be putting forward. So that's the difference. One is meant for the broad community, one is meant for a hub to use as a guide for conversations with providers you might contract with or coordinate with. Oh, great question that just came through regarding the RFA that I can answer. It says, does the RFA pertain only to the supervising organization, or should community service providers also send in an RFA? Wonderful question. I do need to say that since I'm answering a question related to the RFA, this is not an official answer. An official answer will have to come from procurement, but I can say service providers should not send in their own RFAs. They should, if they're interested in participating in the process, link up with the coordinating or leadership organization that's forming in your community to work on turning in an application and become part of that group. Lots of questions coming in about the readiness assessment, so I'll answer one more and then also want to let folks know this is Megan Irwin speaking. If you have really detailed and specific questions related to those assessments, feel free to email me or call me too, and we can go through that. So I'll answer this one, and then would love to see if folks have any questions for Heidi and Shane related to the process of asset mapping or anything you want to ask about their experience leading those processes in communities. But this question is, the provider readiness assessment is for multiple service providers within the hub, not for the hub itself, right? And the answer to that question is yes. There's the community self-readiness assessment for the hub itself, and then the provider readiness assessment to use as a tool for hubs to have conversations with providers they're thinking of coordinating or contracting with.
So I want to address a strategic question really quick. Somebody mentioned that Jeff Cohen mentioned it is unlikely one or a few actions will produce the outcomes desired. From a strategic perspective, singular actions are not likely to ever produce the outcomes desired. However, what you're looking for is actions that leverage each other and work together, and that's the conversation that happens when you explore the relationship between your assets and your needs. So you're always going to be looking for what's one action I can take that will address multiple needs. That's the strategic approach to this. And again, the work that we're doing here is to help you identify the individual actions, but you always want to be thinking about how they interact with each other at a more systemic level.
We have a question that just came in about how providers might find the coordinators who are thinking about submitting a hub application in their communities. That's a fabulous question. At this point, it's hard to answer it definitively, but I can say as a resource to folks, the Early Learning Council has asked for coordinating entities who are thinking about submitting applications to become hubs to turn in a letter of community interest to let us know that they're thinking about doing this. Those letters are due today and will be posted online. So they're not binding. I don't think that you could consider the letters that we're getting in a comprehensive list of folks who are thinking about this, but that's at least one way that providers can providers, parents, community members, anybody interested can start to understand what this is beginning to look like in their community, and those letters will be posted on the Early Learning Council website.
Okay.
Those are all the questions that have come in. Maybe we'll give a quick 30 seconds for folks to think of any other questions they have for Heidi and Shane related to asset mapping.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I want to actually begin to close down our webinar. So I'd like to start just really quick with touching on the events that are still coming up. We have one more webinar coming up on August 7th, same time, 10 o'clock. You can register for it online. It's with Anne Murray Allen, Creating a Shared View for Coordinated Action. And of course, we have the summit on August 12th. Definitely hope to see you there. You have to register for that online as well at the Salem Convention Center, 8 to 4:30. And with that, here is the information that you may want to access this recording and other pieces of data that will be online. Now, not everything is up online yet, so if you go there looking for something and it's not there, just give us a day or two because we actually have to edit some things and finalize some things to get them up in digital form. So you can see here we've got today's presenters, Heidi McGowan and Shane Sasnow. You have our emails if you would like to contact us. You have Megan Irwin's email as well. And at the very bottom, all the materials are on OregonEarlyLearning.com. And you go over to the major initiatives. That's a drop-down menu. And then you look at Early Learning Hubs. And finally, Technical Assistance, Info, and Resources. I'm going to leave this slide up so that you can copy that down. And we'll leave it up for a few minutes. So other than that, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate your time. And we look forward to seeing you at the summit and hopefully at the next webinar. Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.